Alice chased after a rabbit and ended up falling into a rabbit hole. After a long descent, she finally reached the bottom of the hole unharmed. Alice immediately stood up and looked up at the dark hole she had fallen from. She saw a long corridor stretching ahead. She also saw the white rabbit, which was in a hurry, running forward. This time, she couldn't afford to miss the opportunity, so Alice rushed after it like a gust of wind. As she approached the rabbit, she heard it mutter, oh dear, my ears and whiskers," and then it said, "It's too late now." Alice was getting very close to the rabbit, but when she turned the corner, the rabbit had disappeared. She found herself in a long, low hall with doors all around, and every door was locked. Alice went from one side of the hall to the other, pushing and pulling at the doors, but none of them would open. She walked sadly to the center of the hall, wondering how she would get out. Suddenly, she noticed a small glass table with 3 legs that she hadn't seen before. On the table, apart from a tiny gold key, there was nothing else. Alice immediately thought that the key might be for one of the doors. However, either the locks were too big or the key was too small because the key wouldn't fit any of the doors. But as she went around for the second time, she suddenly noticed a low curtain behind which there was a small door about 15 inches high. She used the small gold key and inserted it into the lock of the little door, and it fit perfectly. Alice opened the door and found herself in a narrow corridor even smaller than the rabbit hole. She knelt down and looked down the corridor, seeing a beautiful garden she had never seen before. She longed to leave the dark hall and play in the lovely garden with its cool fountains. However, the door frame was too small for her to pass through. Alice thought, even if my head could fit through, my shoulders won't. I wish I could shrink down like the little people inside a telescope. If only I knew how to do it. Why did Alice think like this? It was because she used to look through a telescope the wrong way round, making everything appear smaller and rounder. So she believed that a telescope could make people larger or smaller. She had encountered such curious things that she thought nothing was impossible anymore. It seemed pointless to wait by the little door, so she went back to the table, hoping to find another key. At the very least, she needed a book that would teach her how to become a little person inside a telescope. But this time, she found a small bottle on the table, which she was sure hadn't been there before. Around the neck of the bottle, there was a little label with the words "Drink Me" printed on it. Drink me seemed like a good idea, but Alice was too smart to just drink it hastily. She thought, I should check if it says poison on it because I've heard some thrilling stories about children being burned, eaten by wild animals, and other unpleasant things, all because they didn't heed the advice of adults. Like holding a poker too long and burning their hands, or cutting their fingers with a knife and bleeding, and so on. I know that if you drink something with poison written on the bottle, you'll come to harm sooner or later. However, the bottle didn't have the word poison on it, so Alice decided to take a sip. It tasted delicious, a mixture of cherry pie, custard, pineapple, roasted turkey, and hot buttered toast. Alice drank the entire bottle eagerly. What a strange feeling! Alice said, I must have turned into one of those little people inside a telescope. She was delighted and thought she must be about 10 inches tall now, which would allow her to enter the beautiful garden. She waited for a few more minutes to see if she would keep shrinking. At the thought of this, she began to feel a little anxious. How would it all end? Maybe she would shrink until she disappeared completely, and then what would happen to her? Alice tried to imagine what a flame would look like after it was extinguished, as she had never seen such a thing. After a while, it seemed that nothing more was happening, so she decided to go to the garden right away. But, oh dear, poor Alice. She reached the door and realized that she had forgotten to take the small gold key with her. When she went back to the table to get it, she found that she couldn't reach the key anymore. She could see it clearly through the glass table, but she couldn't reach it. She tried to climb up the table leg, but it was too slippery, and she slipped down again and again, leaving her exhausted. So, the poor little thing sat down and started crying. Crying wouldn't help, Alice sternly told herself. I must stop crying within a minute. She often gave herself orders, although she rarely followed them. But sometimes she even scolded herself to tears, as she remembered a time when she competed against herself in a game of croquet. And because she cheated herself, she slapped herself in the face. This little girl liked to pretend to be two people. But now, what's the use of pretending to be two people? Poor little Alice thought, oh dear, I know I'm not even enough to be a proper person now. Her eyes fell on a small glass box under the table. When she opened it, there was a tiny cake inside, with the words "Eat me" delicately inscribed on it with currants. Eat me didn't sound too bad. But clever little Alice wouldn't eat it hastily. She said, no, I need to see if it says poison on it first, because I've heard some fascinating stories about children being burned, eaten by wild animals, and other unpleasant things, all because they didn't remember what adults told them, such as holding a poker for too long and burning their hands, or cutting their fingers with a knife and bleeding, and so on. I know that if you drink something with poison written on the bottle, you'll come to harm sooner or later. However, there was no poison written on the cake, so Alice decided to give it a try. She took a small bite, and to her amazement, she didn't change at all. This was, in fact, a normal reaction when eating cake, but Alice had gotten used to such curious things that ordinary occurrences seemed difficult to understand. So, she ate the entire cake quickly.